Let's start with a bombshell new report just released showing what we probably already knew, but we didn't have it in black and white, which is the United States is secretly waging wars around the world using post 9/11 loophole laws that are specifically designed to allow them to just willy-nilly deploy troops wherever the hell they want to and wage secret wars. I think maybe if there's one mission this show has, it's to expose this story, to expose these deep staters, these imperialists for what they are, and expose these types of stories. And so when I saw this report, we'll get to the report in a second, it really just speaks to the desperation of the American hegemony right now. Now, you might have seen this meme floating around, and it's funny because it's true. Just look at this. American geologists looking for oil. And that, I think, sums it up. So almost all of these stories involve some sort of a natural resource, oil at the heart of it, but natural resources in general. And this is what we now use our military for. Instead of defeating the Third Reich, right now we use it to infiltrate and overtake other countries in order to exploit their resources. And we pretend that we're doing it under the guise of democracy when in fact we are arming and supporting terrorists. Like in Syria, we are actively arming Al-Qaeda. And we know it. And you know it. And it's been reported in major publications. And the people of Syria know it. That's just one example. The New York University School of Law's Brennan Center for Justice details how all of this comes together in a new, and what they say is about the Department of Defense has been allowed to covertly deploy troops and wage secret wars over the past 2 decades in dozens of countries across the globe. It really is a damning report that should be the top story, I think, on every major nightly news network, but it won't be. And every major newscast, maybe even around the world, but it won't be. Flip on the BBC, you're not going to see it. Flip on NBC Nightly News, you're not going to see it. But don't worry, because the United States media, of course, are controlled by the deep state intelligence cabal. So they don't want you to know this. They don't want this story out there. And that's why we need to shine a light on it. So here's the report. It's called Secret War, How the U.S. Uses Partnerships and Proxy Forces Under the Radar. And it's an amazing read. I encourage all of you to read it separately, but I'm going to go through some of the high-level pieces of this. We can have a discussion about it, all of us. So here's the introduction. Afghanistan, Iraq, maybe Libya. If you ask the average American where the United States has been at war in the past 2 decades, you would likely get this short list. But the list is wrong. Can you guys in the chat, we'll come back to this in a second, but can you guys in the chat, like if probably people say Iraq, Afghanistan, maybe Libya. They're right. I don't even think Libya might not even be on that list. I think for most people it would be Afghanistan and Iraq.
I wouldn't have said Libya. I would have said Iraq, Afghanistan, and that probably would have been it on my list if you would have asked me, before.
Yeah.
So I saw somebody in chat answer what my answer would have been, and that was all of them. I can't. Well, and I know that it sounds like I'm being, like facetious, but no, literally, I can't think of a single war that is waging on the earth that the United States is not somehow, some way involved in.
That they're like, let's let that one play itself out. We're going to sit that one out. No, that's not the approach.
I mean, even frickin' Armenia and Azerbaijan, Nancy Pelosi has to fly in there and stick her neck in there.
Yeah.
I mean, just everything. You're absolutely right about it. And now we want to do this on the moon, by the way, against China for moon bases. So again, not even on Earth, we want to start these wars. So let me know in the chat how many, and just you name the different countries in the chat. I want to see how many of you guys get them. Anyway, so Afghanistan, Iraq, and maybe Libya. If you ask the average American where the United States has been at war over the past 2 decades, you would likely get this short list, but this list is wrong. It's off by at least 17 countries in which the United States has engaged in armed conflict through ground forces, proxy forces, or airstrikes. It's incredibly troubling.
Yes.
For members of the public, the full extent of the U.S. war making is unknown. You don't know about it. They don't want you to know about it. If you knew about it, there would be a revolt. You can't pay for gasoline.
Like we saw in Vietnam. Think about Vietnam. They showed, soldiers coming home. They showed caskets. They showed the brutality of war And they got so many people that revolted against it. And then they did a little bit of it in Iraq, but then they decided, well, you know what? This time around, let's not do that because it got people up in arms. And so they just completely shut that down, and now they show nothing.
Well, yeah, in Iraq specifically, there's a number of reporters who were told and who are now have come forward later that when they arrived in Baghdad, they were embedded with different military groups, Marines, etc., and they were told, no cameras over here. You can only film this. You can't show this. You can't show these people being hurt, and none of it. It was like totally whitewashed and totally blocked. Now, according to the Cradle, quoting now, among the nations in West Asia affected by these so-called security cooperation authorities, so they have what's known as a security cooperation authority that they get to use for these wars: Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. So they, under this auspice of security cooperation authority, they get to then, be able to go in and have an effect in those 4 countries. However, they also include many African and Latin American nations, known as the Security Cooperation Authorities. They were passed by the U.S. Congress in the years following the September 11th attacks. So this is at the heart of it. It's all post 9/11. And they are a continuation of the 2001 Authorization for Use of Military Force, or the AUMF, which is a piece of legislation that has been stretched by 4 successive governments, the Cradle points out. And now, according to the report, the authorization to use military force covers a broad assortment of terrorist groups, the full list of which the executive branch long withheld from Congress and still withholds from the public. So they wouldn't give it to Congress. It's like us asking for the Pfizer documents. We'll give them to you in 75 years. So they withhold this from Congress, and still to this day, the American people are not allowed to see the list of people that we are actively going after and killing. What? Why don't we ever talk about this when these people run for Congress? So people want to talk about, Fetterman does this and Dr. Oz did that, whatever. I don't give a rat's ass at the end of the day. This is the shit that matters, where people are being killed using U.S. taxpayer dollars around the world.
Mm-hmm. And American lives are being put at stake for something that we have not had an opportunity to buy into.
Yeah.
And that's what really pisses me off. I really wish that they would have something on your tax form where you could opt into the war tax. Because the thing is, like, you are inadvertently, when you pay your taxes, you're supporting this. You are sending your money to kill people around the world. And I wish that if they wanted to know how the American people really felt about war, if they had a tick box and they said, do you support military? Click yes. I guarantee you that would be a low number.
Well, I remember there was a little kid who, like, under George W. Bush, like, he knew that the country was hurting. And so he saved up his allowance, and he brought it like in a jar or something. And he gave his allowance to George W. Bush to help the America's debt problem. Mm-hmm. And I think they ended up like writing it in a check format and giving it to him. And it was like $17 or something. Like, this little kid saved up his hard-earned money and then handed it over to George W. Bush. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, my God,
that kid today has 3 jobs and can't afford gas to get to work.
Right. Or hopefully
that's America.
Hopefully that little kid grew up to be a journalist, an independent journalist, and is exposing the lies of these people. I mean, maybe, just maybe. Meanwhile, so the Cradle says the executive branch long withheld from Congress and still withholds from the public. But this next piece is amazing, on training and equipping. Following in this tradition, the security cooperation authorities being abused by the Pentagon are Section 333 and Section 1227E of Title 10 of the United States Code. Now, this section authorizes the U.S. Army to train and equip foreign forces anywhere in the world, while the other section authorizes the Pentagon to provide support for foreign forces, paramilitaries, and private individuals who are in turn supporting U.S. counterterrorism operations. And they have a spending limit for those individuals up to $100 million per fiscal year.
Where is that, like, where does that fall in the Constitution? Like, our right to do that?
Or the federal budget.
No, this is extra. These are like the extra governmental crap that gets shoved in there that we don't ever see. We don't get to see about it. We don't get to vote on it. It's already here. It's just built into this Security Cooperation Authority code after 9/11. And so we can funnel money to anyone who provides support to foreign forces, paramilitaries, and private individuals. So we can literally fund. That's how we're paying for Al-Qaeda in Ukraine right now to fight against Russia and ISIS, paying them $2,500 a month to go fight in Ukraine. We've covered that story here on the show. Where does that money come from? There you go. Again, quoting the Cradle. However, thanks to the vague definition of support and training in the text of this report, these laws, both Section 333 and Section 127, have been used and abused to target adversarial groups under a strained interpretation of constitutional self-defense. They have also allowed the U.S. Army to develop and control proxy forces that fight on behalf of and sometimes alongside their own. So we can have Al-Qaeda fighting alongside American forces. Like, that's how this works under this code. As a result of this, in dozens of countries, these programs have been used as a springboard for hostilities, with the Pentagon often declining to inform Congress or the United States public about their secret operations under the reasoning that the incidents are too minor to trigger statutory reporting requirements.
What?
They're too minor. So we don't want to bother you with these things.
I mean, shouldn't any bullet fired require reporting requirements?
You would think, but no. This just, when a police officer files a bullet, they have to go then write up a whole report.
Yes.
Right? And it will take them all night to file a report. They hate the the paperwork.
Each individual bullet. Like, it's every single bullet they fire.
Yeah, not the military.
Like, has to be accounted for.
Not this.
No, not the military.
And not even in this situation where you get to then hire proxies to do your work, so you don't have to file any paperwork at all. Mm-hmm. You can just do this through contractors. We don't know what they're firing. We just gave them the weapons. They may or may not be going after Assad's government. We don't know. They might have killed some civilians. We don't know. We can't really be accountable. I'm just a caveman lawyer. I can't really tell you about this.
And if the web of power is dispersed enough that people are making only decisions, but not holistic ones, not based on knowledge of everything, then these things can continue to happen at the behest of very few.
Right. Researchers and reporters uncovered in Section 127 programs not only in Afghanistan and Iraq, but also in Cameroon. Was Cameroon on anyone's list? Was Egypt on anyone's list?
I've never even heard of Cameroon.
Was Kenya on anyone's list? Lebanon, Libya, Mali, Mauritania, Nigeria, Somalia, Syria, Tunisia, Yemen. All of them.
I had most of them on my bingo card.
You had them all on your where's U.S. war bingo card?
Yeah.
I mean, unbelievable. So, this idea of, they're for protection and democracy is just total garbage. Vladimir Putin this weekend has our card. He knows exactly what the United States is up to. He's not falling for it, and neither is China. This is what Vladimir Putin said about this Western democracy and this plundering of resources. This is how the West has enriched itself. Watch.
Какова ситуация с этим на сегодняшний день? Потому что в значительной степени тот уровень благосостояния, который достигнут в бывших колониальных державах, он основан на ограблении.
So the level of prosperity that the West has achieved is largely due to the plunder of the African continent. This is well known. Even policymakers in Europe don't hide this, he says. It is because of the suffering of the African continent, not in full, but in large part, that prosperity of colonial powers came to be. It's an evident fact. Resource robbery and the slave trade. Yeah. And the plundering of the African continent. That's how it came to be. Even Europe doesn't hide this, he says. So a few hours ago in Syria, once again, just an extension of this same report, an extension of all of this, explosions overnight. The U.S., of course, and Israeli, we're unclear at this hour if it's Israeli drones or U.S. drones. They're all one and the same. It doesn't really matter. All acting in the same exact way, imperialists. Attacks on Syria-Iraq border leave 15 people dead. Large explosions ripping through the outskirts of the Al-Bukamal area following airstrikes launched near the Syrian-Iraq border. Crossing the eastern countryside, a 22-tanker convoy, 22 tankers filled with oil, destroyed. This oil and gas, was being brought from Iran, was crossing into Syria from Iraq when the United States was bought from Iran, was crossing into Syria from Iraq when U.S. or Israeli regime drones attacked the first two of the tankers and destroyed them. At least 15 people who were nearby the blast site are confirmed to have been killed. And again, these are just some of the images of it. And you see, like, as well, that there are additional explosions from these tankers. And this oil was going to help the Lebanese people. This oil was going to make sure that the people have oil in a time when we have absolutely destroyed the country of Lebanon.
Wait, how do we know that it was going into Lebanon?
It's been confirmed.
That it was only crossing through Syria then.
Right. So, well, we got some confirmation because I sat down and spoke with Kevork Almasian, who is one of the great journalists in the world. He is Syrian. He spoke to me this afternoon from Berlin, Germany. He's been following the story very closely, the plundering of Syrian oil and what happened with these explosions. Here's Kevork. Attacks overnight on these oil tankers.
Actually, there is a very powerful Arabic saying, when Syria gets cold, Lebanon also sneezes. And since the eruption of the war in Syria and the deterioration of the economic situation in Syria itself, this has also reflected negatively on Lebanon. Lebanon declared that it's a bankrupt state just a few months ago, and the banking system has collapsed, and also they have a very severe energy crisis there. Therefore, Lebanon has few options. They have to either import it from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, or they have to import it from Iran. And actually, Qatar and Saudi Arabia aren't providing Lebanon with these materials. So the parties or the political blocs in Lebanon that are aligned with Iran, they are bringing free fuel, free gas and free fuel from Iran, and Iran isn't charging for this fuel, I would say. But the side that is discussing or negotiating with the Iranian side is the Lebanese Hezbollah. And as we may know, Israel and the United States, they consider Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. But Hezbollah in Lebanon is considered a resistance group. And it is the legitimacy of Hezbollah comes from the government of Lebanon that approves the activities of Hezbollah in this regard. And it just yesterday, the tankers, I think there were around 20 tankers full of oil coming from Iran to Iraq, and from Iraq there is a border crossing near Al Deir ez-Zor or near Abu Kamal, and this area has been targeted by when Biden came to power, just a few days after he came to power, and they struck few convoys as well, because this is the only lifeline of Syria that can connect Syria to Iraq and from Iraq to Iran. And yesterday, these tankers were targeted. There over also 20 people died. Some of them are Iranian, some of them are Lebanese. The American side denies the involvement of its air force in the attacks. And personally, because I followed this situation for a very long time, I haven't seen once that the United States denied the involvement in these strikes. So this keeps an open question: who did these strikes?
Was it Israeli?
That's a high probability, because the Israeli side refused to comment on this issue, and they refused to give any statement or say we are responsible for this. Therefore, the accusations probably is going towards Israel and not towards the United States, because the United States isn't shy to strike anything, any moving object or any moving person in Syria, and they would just say, oh, these people that we targeted or these objects that we targeted were Iranian affiliated objects or Iranian affiliated forces, etc., etc. So they always have the excuse for that. Now that the United States is denying its involvement, I would say the Israelis targeted it, because at the end of the day, Hezbollah, who is bringing this fuel into Lebanon, they are easing the economic situation in Lebanon and for the Lebanese people. And Israel and the United States, they want to keep this situation right now. They want to keep the economic hardship in Lebanon until the election, because the Lebanese president, Michel Aoun, who was aligned with Hezbollah, his term is now over, and Lebanon has to elect a new president. And since Michel Aoun, the Christian quote-unquote president, came to power, who is an ally of Hezbollah, Lebanon has lived has been going through a very difficult economic situation, partly because of the sanctions against Syria, but also because of the American policy in Lebanon itself. So when the American administration or the Israelis want to keep the economic situation very dire, because they want to send a signal that if you vote for a president again, or choose or elect a president again who is aligned with Hezbollah, this is your fate. This is how this economic situation is going to be. Therefore, the alternative, or who the Americans want to elect, is a person called Samir Jaja, and he is a very radical right-wing, and I personally would call him a fascist as well. He was in jail for a very long time because he has committed war crimes and very horrendous crimes during the Lebanese civil war. He was the head of a militia in Lebanon. He committed acts of genocide against the Palestinians, against the Syrians, and any Muslims there.
This is who the U.S. wants.
Yes, because this guy is very, I would say, charismatic. Yes, I would not deny that, and he is always he's pro-Israeli, he's pro-Saudi Arabia, and he wants to cut relations of Lebanon with Iran. He wants to deny Hezbollah for its activities, whether it's against Israel or any other activities. So this is their preferred candidate for the Lebanese presidency.
Kevork, what about the Syrian people and the oil? Of course, we talking about the Americans continuing. There was a meme floating around. We just showed it on the show that American soldiers are, the meme of Americans walking through the desert with guns is American geologists, soldiers. But of course, they are not. And we're still continuing to steal the oil in Syria. Is that still unfolding at this hour? Are American soldiers still? We know that a new base apparently is being opened as well. So the pilfering of oil and resources continues in Syria.
Clayton, the American forces aren't stealing the Syrian oil. They are guarding the Syrian oil. Right. They're guarding the oil fields, just looking that no one from the Syrians can use the oil. Unfortunately, there are so many military posts, I would say. They're not like a military bases. There are so many military posts for the American occupation forces in Syria. And they are just making sure that this oil and the fuel isn't going to the Syrian people. And this is the policy of the United States. The regime change has failed. Regime change policy has failed in Syria. Now they want to strangle the Syrian people so that they get rid of Bashar al-Assad, the president of Syria. They want the people to rise against the president because he's unable to provide the basic necessities for them, right? So this is the policy. I think it will fail. And the shift in the mood in Syria is also related to the Ukraine war nowadays. They're betting that if Russia comes out of this war and there is a unipolar system, Syria will also be part of this unipolar system, because the failure of the American policy in the region started or basically in Syria after 2011, because before that Iraq was the president was removed, in Libya it was removed, and other places also through this so-called Arab Spring. But Syria, it was a big failure. So I think the Americans have no future in Syria. They can stay here for a year or two, but on a long term, there is no vision for the Americans. What are they going to do? Are they going to stay in Syria and they guard the Syrian oil? Because at the end of the day, if this will happen, the Syrians, or with the help of allies, they can also organize a resistance against the American occupation forces, and they're not wanted there. The areas that they live, the American forces on the eastern shore of the Euphrates, they're unwelcome there. And every time we can see the videos of them, people are throwing stones on the American forces. They're asking them to leave. But in this regard, see how the United States is trying to block the access of the Lebanese to the Iranian fuel, for example. It's the same policy here. It's just harming the people, the politicians, the leaders, or anyone in the government. If you go to Syria or Lebanon and go to their offices, they're warm, they have all their food, they have all their necessities. It's only the people suffering from these issues, right? Therefore, I would say this policy is slowly killing the people in the region. Physically, mentally, psychologically, and it's driving the people into the brink of desperation. And therefore, we see a very big influx nowadays also for Syrians are leaving the country, although the war is technically now is paused, but because of the hard situation, lots of people, especially the educated people, are living to the Gulf countries, to the Emirates, to Qatar, to Bahrain, to other countries. And this is also draining Syria from its from the people that can reconstruct the country and the people who can rebuild the country, right? So it's a very, I would say, deadly policy, and there is no sight. I cannot see that the United States will change this policy in Syria in the near future. The only way for the Americans to change course is now to lose the war in the proxy war in Ukraine, or the Syrians to organize an armed resistance against the American forces to kick them out of the country. There is no other way.
So sad, so sad. Thank you to Kevork for joining us on that. And, U.S. officials had said recently that the only way to rid Lebanon of Hezbollah is for the country to fall into complete collapse in order to be rebuilt from the ashes. And so apparently they fooled the Lebanese into thinking that Iranian fuel deliveries would be allowed or permitted, according to a report. And no. So they thought, okay, these fuel deliveries are going to come. They're going to be allowed. These people are suffering. And then as soon as they start rolling, 22 tankers start rolling, they bomb them and destroy them. Like, this is what we're doing there. Absolutely disgusting. So again, the Pentagon exploiting these 9/11 laws, these post 9/11 laws, to wage all of these secret wars. And none of this was on the ballot. This is like why it's so frustrating for the election night last night.
I know, because we've just passed our time where we could make it known that we're not for killing other people. And nobody, and it was convenient that we just instead argue about women's rights, or what is a woman, or
drag shows.
Drag shows in schools, or, all of these other distracting things while people continue to
And look, that's not to say that, culturally those things aren't incredibly important, right? The destruction of our children, right? That's absolutely important.
Sure.
However,
but we find the time to talk about those things as a broader issue.
Yeah.
While also, we always sort of lead the show off with, like, who are we, advocating for
safety and shelter.
Live.
Yes, food, safety, and shelter. And when you have the United States hegemony rolling into your country, destroying your country, it's really, really awful. So thanks to Kevork for joining us.